Single mom takes twins to billionaire's job interview. What they do next shocks everyone. The shrill beeping of the alarm clock sliced through the darkness, a cold reminder that another long day had begun. Claire Evans blinked up at the ceiling, her body aching from exhaustion before she had even moved. For a fleeting moment, she considered ignoring it. Just 5 more minutes. Just a little longer in the warmth of her bed, wrapped in the fragile illusion of rest. But 5 more minutes was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her hand shot out, silencing the alarm before it could wake the two small figures sleeping soundly in the next room. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, rubbing her face, willing herself to find energy where there was none. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside, a world already moving forward without her. Claire exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stand. The worn-out carpet beneath her feet was cold, sending a shiver up her spine as she padded toward the bathroom. She turned on the tap and splashed icy water on her face, gasping as the shock of it chased away the last remnants of sleep. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The dark circles beneath her green eyes, the lines etched into her forehead from stress rather than age. At 29, she felt twice as old. She had once dreamed of a different life. A life where she didn't have to measure every dollar spent, where she didn't have to choose between rent and groceries, where she could buy her boys toys without calculating how much it would set them back for the month. But dreams were just that, dreams. Reality was the small two-bedroom apartment with water stains on the ceiling, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, and the relentless exhaustion that never seemed to leave her bones. She grabbed a towel and dried her face, her reflection still staring back at her, hollow and tired. Today was no different. She had an early cleaning shift at the hotel, another temporary gig that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Claire tied her hair back into a messy ponytail, threw on her worn-out jeans and a faded sweatshirt, and stepped into the kitchen. The smell of peanut butter lingered from the sandwiches she had made the night before, neatly packed in small plastic bags for her twins. She placed two colorful sticky notes beside their breakfast, one with a little smiley face and the words, "Be good today, Mommy loves you," and the other with a heart, a small reassurance for them while she was away. Her eyes flickered to the clock, 5:45 a.m. If she left now, she would just make it in time. But then her phone buzzed. Her heart lurched. Calls at this hour were never good news. She snatched the phone off the counter, her fingers trembling slightly. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. "Hello?" Her voice was hoarse from sleep, her mind already bracing for bad news. The voice on the other end was deep, formal. "Am I speaking with Claire Evans?" "Yes, this is she." "This is Alice Grant from the Hastings estate. I received your application for the permanent housekeeping position." Claire's breath caught. The Hastings estate. For weeks she had been applying for cleaning jobs, anything that could offer a steady paycheck rather than the unstable shifts that changed at a moment's notice. Most of her applications had gone unanswered, swallowed by the endless void of the job market. But this was different. The Hastings estate wasn't just any job. It was the opportunity she had been praying for. A full-time position, benefits, a stable income. Yes, of course," Claire stammered, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm very interested. Mr. Hastings would like to meet you for an interview today at 10 a.m. Would that be possible?" Claire's stomach dropped. 10 a.m. Mrs. Porter, her elderly neighbor who usually watched the twins during her shifts, had warned her last night that she had a doctor's appointment and wouldn't be available today. There was no one else. Her mind raced through possibilities. Canceling wasn't an option. This was too important. But she couldn't leave the boys alone. Claire hesitated, chewing the inside of her cheek. "Would it be a problem if I brought my children with me? They're 5-year-old twins. I promise they behave well." A pause on the other end. "It's not standard procedure," Alice said slowly, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Hastings is very particular about his routine." Claire swallowed. Of course he was. Billionaires didn't run their lives on chaos. "But," Alice continued, as if making a decision in real time, "since it's just for the interview, I'll make an exception." Relief flooded Claire's chest so fast she almost felt dizzy. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you so much. I'll be there promptly at 10. She hung up, her heart pounding. a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. Excitement, anxiety, hope. This could change everything. She turned toward the small hallway that led to the twins' room. The wooden floor creaked beneath her steps as she pushed open the door, revealing the two tiny figures curled up beneath a heap of blankets. Their identical faces, so peaceful in sleep, made her chest tighten. "Ethan, Liam," she whispered, stepping closer. She placed a gentle hand on Liam's back, rubbing slow circles until he stirred. Ethan followed a second later, blinking sleepily. "Mom," Liam mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "It's still dark." "I know, baby," Claire said softly. "But we have to get up early today. We're going on an adventure." Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What kind of adventure?" "The kind where we need to be on our best behavior," Claire said, pulling back their blankets and helping them sit up. "Mommy has a very important meeting today, and you both get to come with me." Liam perked up. "Are we going to the library?" "No, sweetheart," Claire chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Somewhere even bigger." Excitement lit up their little faces, pushing away the last remnants of sleep. Claire helped them get dressed, buttoning up their small jackets, tying their shoes with practiced ease. She made sure their backpacks had their coloring books and snacks, knowing distractions would be crucial. By the time they left the apartment, the sun had just begun to rise, painting the city in soft hues of gold and pink. Claire held each of their hands tightly as they walked toward the bus stop, her heart hammering with nerves. She had no idea what awaited her at the Hastings estate. She had no idea if Mr. Hastings would take one look at her children and dismiss her on the spot. But she knew one thing. This was her chance, and she wouldn't let it slip away. The bus was late, again. Claire's pulse pounded in her ears as she checked her watch for the 100th time, her grip tightening around Ethan and Liam's small hands. 10 minutes behind schedule. 10 minutes she didn't have. She forced a reassuring smile for the boys, despite the panic twisting in her stomach. She had planned everything, woke up before dawn, packed their things, left the apartment with extra time to spare. And yet, somehow, the universe had decided today of all days to test her patience. "Mom, are we going to be late?" Ethan asked, tilting his head up to look at her, his green eyes mirroring her own worry. "No, honey," Claire lied, squeezing his fingers gently. "We'll be right on time." The words felt empty as she watched the bus pull up slower than usual, the driver barely sparing a glance at the passengers boarding. Claire ushered the boys forward, her heartbeat quickening as she scanned the nearly full bus. A woman with a large shopping bag took up 2 seats. A businessman sat with his briefcase protectively on the next seat beside him. There was no space for the three of them together. Claire swallowed her frustration and maneuvered them toward the back. She sat with Liam on her lap, Ethan pressed close to her side, his small fingers gripping her sleeve. They bounced with every bump in the road, but Claire barely noticed. Her mind was racing ahead to what lay in front of her. The Carter Mansion, the most important job interview of her life, and the man behind it, Mr. Harrison Carter, a billionaire with a reputation for being as ruthless as he was reclusive. She had read about him before. People whispered about the empire he built, the way he ran his estate with military precision. It was rumored that staff barely saw him, that he conducted business like a phantom, giving orders through intermediaries, appearing only when necessary. Claire wasn't sure what kind of man she was about to face, but she knew one thing. He had no room for mistakes. The mansion came into view as the bus neared the stop, a towering estate standing atop the highest hill in the wealthiest part of town. Its stone walls loomed over the landscape like something out of a storybook, only without the warmth. It was a house of power, of calculated elegance, of a life Claire had never known. "Mom, that house looks like a castle," Liam whispered in awe as they stepped off the bus. Claire forced another smile. "It does, doesn't it?" She wished she could see the magic they saw in it, but all she could feel was the weight of reality pressing against her chest. This was her one shot, a steady income, health insurance, a future for her boys. And if she failed, she wouldn't let herself think about that. The iron gates were guarded by a man with a stoic expression. He eyed Claire and the twins skeptically as she explained her reason for being there. After a brief exchange over his radio, the gate slowly creaked open, granting them passage. The walk up the long, pristine driveway felt endless. The boys clutched her hands, whispering to each other about the perfectly shaped hedges and the marble fountain in the center of the courtyard. Claire barely heard them. Her mind was already in the interview room, mentally preparing answers, smoothing down the wrinkles in her blouse, forcing herself to breathe. As they reached the grand entrance, the heavy wooden doors opened before they could knock. A woman stood before them, tall and severe, her gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. "Miss Evans," she said, her tone clipped, her gaze dropping briefly to the twins before snapping back up. "You were expected at 10. It is now 10:15. Claire's stomach twisted. "I'm so sorry. The bus. Mr. Carter values punctuality." Claire swallowed hard. The implication was clear. The interview had already started off on the wrong foot. "These must be your children," the woman continued, softer this time, though there was still an air of disapproval in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. Ethan and Liam." The boys offered a shy, synchronized hello. The housekeeper, whose name Claire now recognized as Alice Grant, gave them a curt nod before stepping aside. "Follow me." The interior of the mansion was even more imposing than the exterior. High ceilings, antique chandeliers, and expensive artwork lined the walls, each piece undoubtedly worth more than Claire's yearly rent. The space was meticulously clean, eerily quiet, and impossibly large. "This way," Alice instructed, leading them down a long hallway until they reached a massive room Claire assumed was the living area. "You may wait here. Mr. Carter will be with you shortly. Please ensure the children do not touch anything." Claire nodded quickly. "Of course. Thank you." Alice left without another word. Claire sat on the very edge of an expensive-looking leather sofa, placing Ethan and Liam beside her. "Remember what we talked about?" she whispered, scanning their innocent faces. "Super quiet," Liam whispered back, "like the library." Claire exhaled. "Exactly." Minutes passed, then more. Every second that ticked by made her chest tighter. Had he changed his mind? Had he already dismissed her for being late? She was about to stand when she realized something. The twins were gone. Her heart nearly stopped. "Ethan? Liam?" She called their names in a frantic whisper, jumping up, her pulse hammering in her ears. Nothing. Panic surged through her. She couldn't have lost them. Not here. Not now. She darted toward the hallway, scanning the vast house, her voice barely controlled. "Ethan! Liam!" Then she heard it. Small voices coming from the end of a long corridor. Claire ran. She skidded to a stop in the doorway of a grand office. And there they were, standing before a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit, a man whose presence filled the entire space with an unspoken authority. Harrison Carter. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She was about to apologize, about to scoop the boys up and beg for a second chance, when she heard Liam's voice. "Mister, you look sick. Do you want a hug?" The room fell deathly silent. Harrison Carter's expression didn't change at first. Surprise flickered behind his cold blue eyes, followed by something else, something unreadable. "I don't need hugs," he said at last, his voice rough as if he hadn't used it in a long time. Ethan tilted his head. "Everybody needs hugs. Mom says hugs are medicine for sadness." Claire's entire body tensed. Harrison Carter's gaze snapped to hers, locking her in place. His stare was piercing, as if he were seeing right through her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. "Miss Evans." Claire swallowed, summoning every ounce of courage. "Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. I just left them for a second and—" "Are they always this forward?" Claire flushed. They seem to have made themselves at home," he mused, studying the boys. His eyes lingered, as if he were trying to place something. "They just turned 5, Claire added, unsure why she said it. Harrison nodded slightly, then to Claire's absolute shock, he turned to Alice, who had just appeared in the doorway. "Prepare the paperwork. Miss Evans will start on Monday." Claire blinked. "Wait, what?" "You're hired." And just like that, her world shifted. As she took Ethan and Liam's hands, preparing to leave, she glanced back at Harrison Carter. And for the briefest moment, she swore she saw something there, hidden deep beneath his unreadable expression. Something broken, something waiting to be healed. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of something that would change all of their lives forever. The morning sun barely pierced through the dense clouds hanging over the Carter mansion as Claire Evans stepped onto the pristine grounds. Her boys, Ethan and Liam, walked beside her, their small hands gripping hers tightly. She had already secured the job, but today was the true test, working under Harrison Carter, a man whose reputation loomed as large as his estate. For years, she had only heard whispers about him, the billionaire recluse, a man with no patience for mistakes, no tolerance for disruptions. He ran his world with military precision, and anyone who failed to meet his standards simply disappeared from his payroll. Claire had worked for difficult employers before, but something about Harrison Carter felt different, more intimidating, more distant, as though he had constructed walls around himself as impenetrable as the mansion's iron gates. Claire had tried to prepare herself. She promised herself that she would be strong, that she would prove her worth no matter how impossible the expectations. But now, standing before the grand wooden doors of the estate, her nerves gnawed at her insides like a relentless storm. Alice Grant, the head housekeeper, greeted her with a firm nod as she opened the door. "Miss Evans, you will follow me," she said briskly. Her gaze flickered down to the twins and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Remember, Mr. Carter expects order. There is no room for disruptions." Claire nodded, leading the boys carefully inside. The moment she stepped into the mansion, the weight of the place hit her. Everything gleamed with silent opulence, marble floors that stretched endlessly, chandeliers so large they could illuminate an entire city block. But it wasn't just the grandeur that overwhelmed her. It was the coldness. There were no personal touches, no family photographs, no signs of warmth or life. It was a house built to impress, not to be lived in. Her stomach tightened as they followed Alice through a series of hallways. With every step, the air seemed heavier, the silence louder. And then, just as they approached a massive wooden door, Alice stopped and turned. "Mr. Carter does not like to repeat himself," she warned, her voice low. "He values punctuality above all else. He dislikes interruptions, unnecessary chatter, and disorganization. Do your job, follow instructions, and keep out of his way." Claire swallowed hard and nodded. She had been through worse. She could handle this. Alice knocked once before pushing open the door. The office inside was grand yet unwelcoming. Dark mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, and towering windows cast long, cold shadows across the room. And there, behind a massive desk, sat the man himself, Harrison Carter. He barely looked up as they entered, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. He was younger than Claire had expected, probably in his late 30s, but there was something about him that felt much older. His presence filled the room, suffocating and powerful like a storm waiting to break. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes landing on Claire with the precision of a blade. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice deep and emotionless. Claire's breath hitched, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." His gaze flickered to the twins, who stood quietly beside her, their hands clutching the hem of her coat. "I was under the impression that this was a professional work environment, not a daycare." Claire's stomach dropped. She had expected this. Still, hearing the disdain in his voice made her heart pound. "I understand, Mr. Carter," she said carefully. "But my child care arrangement fell through today. It won't happen again." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. The silence stretched unbearably. Then finally he exhaled sharply, as if already regretting what he was about to say. "Fine," he said, his tone clipped. "For today they stay in the kitchen with Mrs. Grant, but if they cause any disruption—" "They won't," Claire promised quickly. "Thank you." She could feel Alice's disapproving gaze boring into her as she led the twins out of the office. Once they were settled at the kitchen table with coloring books, Claire rushed to begin her work, determined to prove herself. She scrubbed floors, polished furniture, and dusted shelves with practiced efficiency, her body moving on autopilot despite the nerves gnawing at her insides. Hours passed, and she had almost allowed herself to believe she was succeeding, until she heard it. A crash, a sharp, shattering sound followed by silence. Claire's blood turned to ice. She turned the corner just in time to see Liam standing frozen in the hallway, his wide eyes locked on the floor, where a shattered vase lay in pieces at his feet. And standing just beyond him, towering and furious, was Harrison Carter. Claire's stomach clenched as she hurried forward, shielding Liam instinctively. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "It was an accident." "I don't tolerate accidents," Harrison cut in coldly. His gaze flickered between Claire and the boy. "Do you have any idea how much that vase was worth?" Claire's heart pounded. "I $30,000. Her breath hitched. She barely made enough to pay her rent, let alone cover something worth more than everything she owned. Liam's lower lip trembled. I, I didn't mean to, he whispered, his tiny voice breaking. Harrison's expression hardened. For a long moment, Claire was certain he was about to fire her on the spot. But then, something strange happened. His gaze lingered on Liam, really lingered, as if seeing something beyond the present moment. His jaw tightened, and then, just as suddenly as the anger had flared, it faded into something else, something unreadable. He turned abruptly, raking a hand through his hair. "Forget it," he muttered. "Alice, clean this up." And with that, he walked away. Claire let out a shaky breath, her heart still hammering. She knelt beside Liam, brushing a hand over his hair. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." But as she glanced down the hallway where Harrison had disappeared, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. She didn't know what or why, but she knew one thing for certain. Harrison Carter wasn't just an unfeeling billionaire. He was a man with ghosts. And somehow she and her boys had just stepped straight into them. The tension in the Carter mansion had a presence of its own, thick and suffocating like a heavy fog that refused to lift. Claire Evans had spent the last few days walking on eggshells, trying her hardest to remain invisible, to prove her worth through hard work and silence. She had scrubbed the floors until her fingers ached, polished furniture until her reflection stared back at her, and dusted shelves that probably hadn't seen a speck of dirt in years. But no matter how much effort she put in, she could still feel the weight of Harrison Carter's gaze lingering in the background. A man who had built walls so high around himself that no one dared to climb them. And then, in a matter of seconds, her boys shattered those walls in a way no one ever had. She had turned her back for only a moment. One second, Ethan and Liam had been quietly sitting on the leather sofa in the grand living room, coloring with the pencils Alice had given them. The next, they were gone. Claire's heart nearly stopped. Panic shot through her like a jolt of electricity. "Ethan? Liam?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended, the fear coating her words. "Nothing. Oh God, not here, not in this massive house where a single hallway felt like a maze, where a single mistake could cost her the one job she desperately needed." She turned a corner, her pulse hammering against her ribs, her footsteps quick against the marble floors. And then she heard them. Soft voices, innocent, curious, and then the voice she feared most. Deep, controlled, cold. Harrison Carter. Claire rushed forward, her breath caught in her throat, and stopped dead in her tracks at the entrance of the study. There, standing before the formidable man himself, were her sons. And Liam, in all his unfiltered 5-year-old innocence, had just asked the most dangerous man she had ever met if he wanted a hug. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire felt her heart stutter. Harrison Carter, a man known for his ruthless business dealings, for his lack of patience, for his cold, unyielding nature, simply stared at the small boy standing before him. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled slightly on the desk, but his face was unreadable. Liam stood firm, his green eyes filled with nothing but pure, childlike sincerity. "You look sad," he said chuckling. "Mom says hugs are medicine for sadness." Ethan, standing beside his brother, nodded in agreement. "They really work." Claire's breath hitched. She wanted to move, to intervene, to apologize, to do something to stop whatever was about to unfold. But she couldn't. She was frozen, caught in the thick, electric air that had wrapped around the room like a force field. Harrison Carter did not move. For a long, impossible moment, his expression remained unreadable. His gaze flickered toward Claire, something stormy swirling behind those icy blue eyes, and then back to the boys. "I don't need hugs," he said at last, his voice rough, as though it hadn't been used in a long time. Liam's little face scrunched up. "Are you sure? Everybody needs hugs." The room was still, the kind of stillness that was suffocating, that pressed against Claire's chest like a weight too heavy to bear. And then, Something happened that made the world tilt slightly off its axis. Harrison Carter's fingers twitched. It was almost imperceptible, but Claire saw it. A slight movement, a hesitation, like a man standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, something terrifying. He exhaled sharply and turned away, as if physically rejecting the moment, as if breaking eye contact would shatter whatever strange, unspoken thing had just passed between him and the little boy who had dared to touch something inside him. He turned his back to them. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice regaining its steel, "control your children." Claire snapped out of her daze. Yes, of course. I'm so sorry, sir. It won't happen again." She hurried forward, taking Ethan and Liam by the hands, their small fingers curling into hers as she gently but firmly pulled them away from the man who had momentarily forgotten how to breathe. She expected anger, a reprimand, a cold dismissal, but Harrison said nothing. As they reached the doorway, Claire glanced back over her shoulder, unable to stop herself, and what she saw made her chest tighten. Harrison Carter, the untouchable billionaire, was still standing there, his back to them, his shoulders tense. His hands, those hands that had undoubtedly signed countless business deals, that had built an empire, were curled into fists at his sides. He was breathing heavily, as if something inside him had cracked open, letting in air for the first time in years. The moment passed, fleeting and fragile. And then, like a shutter snapping shut, the steel mask returned, and he moved back to his desk, as if nothing had happened at all. Claire didn't know what to make of it. She didn't know what had just happened. But she knew one thing: her boys had touched something in Harrison Carter that no one else had. And whether he liked it or not, something inside him had shifted. Something deep, something broken, and maybe, just maybe, something waiting to be healed. Claire Evans had spent her entire life bracing for rejection. It came in many forms: landlords shaking their heads at her late payments, hiring managers glancing over her resume before saying, "We'll be in touch," and her ex walking out the door without looking back. She had learned to expect disappointment. It was easier that way, but nothing had prepared her for what happened next. She stood in Harrison Carter's office, gripping Ethan and Liam's hands, her heart hammering so hard it felt like it would break through her ribs. The boys had just committed the ultimate sin, interrupting the most powerful man she had ever met, offering him something as simple, as dangerous, as a hug. And yet, he hadn't exploded in fury. He hadn't ordered them out. Instead, he had stood there, silent, frozen, as if their innocent words had struck something deep within him. Claire had expected to be fired on the spot. Instead, she was staring at Harrison Carter as he sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin, looking at her in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just scrutiny, it was something else, something she couldn't define. Then, in a voice that was both deliberate and unexpected, he spoke. "Mrs. Grant," he said, addressing the housekeeper, who had appeared in the doorway, looking as stunned as Claire felt. "Prepare the paperwork. Miss Evans will start on Monday." Claire's breath caught. The room was silent, as if the world itself had momentarily stopped turning. "Wait, what?" The words escaped her before she could stop them. "You're hired," Harrison said matter-of-factly, as if they had simply been discussing the weather and not completely upending her life in the span of 3 seconds. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire was speechless. She had fought for everything in her life, clawed her way through struggles that should have broken her, and now, just like that, this opportunity was being handed to her. She swallowed hard. "Mr. Carter, But he had already turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, as though the conversation was over. As though she wasn't standing there, barely able to breathe, barely able to process what had just happened. Alice cleared her throat softly. "Miss Evans, let's discuss the details in the kitchen." Claire nodded, her legs moving on instinct rather than understanding. She guided the boys out, their small hands still clasped in hers, her mind racing. As they stepped into the hall, she turned to Alice, who was looking at her with something almost resembling approval. "I don't understand," Claire said, shaking her head. "Why would he hire me? I was late." "My kids interrupted his meeting." Alice gave a knowing smile, leading her toward the staff quarters. "Mr. Carter rarely hires anyone without an extensive vetting process, but I've never seen him decide so quickly." Claire frowned. "That doesn't answer my question." Alice sighed, pouring 2 cups of coffee and handing one to Claire before settling into a chair across from her. You're not wrong to be confused, Alice admitted. Mr. Carter is a man who values order, control. He does not make impulsive decisions. She paused, studying Claire for a long moment. But your boys did something today that no one else has. Claire exhaled sharply, glancing at Ethan and Liam, who were now doodling on napkins at the kitchen table, blissfully unaware of the life-changing moment that had just taken place. They spoke to him, Alice continued, her voice softer now. Not as a billionaire, not as a businessman, but as a person. Claire frowned. And that means what exactly? Alice hesitated, as if weighing how much she should say. Then, with a careful glance toward the hallway, as though ensuring they were truly alone, she leaned in slightly. Mr. Carter has not been the same since the accident, she said quietly. Since he lost his wife and son. Claire's heart clenched. She had suspected there was something behind the cold exterior, something buried deep, but hearing it confirmed sent a strange wave of emotion through her. Alice continued, For 3 years this house has been silent. No laughter, no warmth. He barely speaks to anyone unless absolutely necessary. And yet, she gestured toward the boys. Your children walked in here and treated him like a person. A sad person, yes, but a person nonetheless. Claire let out a shaky breath, her gaze drifting toward the grand hallway leading back to Harrison Carter's office. Had her boys really done what no one else had? Had they cracked something in a man who had built his life around keeping people out? She looked back at Alice. And you think that's why he hired me? Alice shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it's because for the first time in 3 years, he didn't want to send someone away. Claire swallowed past the lump in her throat. She had spent years being turned away, being told she wasn't enough. And now, in the most unexpected of places, she had been given a chance. A real chance. Not just at a job, but at something more. A fresh start. A future for her boys. She turned back to her children, watching them giggle as they argued over whose drawing was better, and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just here for herself anymore. She was here for them. And maybe, just maybe, she was here for Harrison Carter too. She straightened her shoulders, determination settling in her bones. No matter what happened next, she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. What do you think? Do you believe Harrison Carter hired Claire purely on instinct? Or did something deeper drive his decision? Comment below if you think Ethan and Liam have already started changing Mr. Carter's world in ways he never expected. Let's show our support for Claire and her boys. The first morning at the Carter mansion felt surreal. Claire Evans had stepped into another world, one that felt too grand, too quiet, too empty for something that was supposed to be a home. The moment she arrived, the weight of the place settled over her like a heavy cloak, cold, suffocating, and unshakable. It was the kind of silence that wasn't just about the absence of noise. It was something deeper, something carved into the very walls of the house, as if grief had been woven into its foundation. She had worked in wealthy homes before, but nothing like this. This was more than wealth. This was loneliness, frozen in time. Claire followed Alice through the hallways, absorbing the details as they passed. The floors gleamed with impossible perfection, reflecting the light from massive chandeliers hanging above. The walls bore paintings of landscapes, all meticulously placed, but none with any warmth. No family photos, no signs of a life being lived here. The mansion was grand, beautiful even, but it felt abandoned despite its pristine condition. Alice led her to the main quarters where she would be working. Mr. Carter spends most of his time in his office, she explained as they moved through the endless corridors. He doesn't like interruptions. Stick to your duties and don't engage unless he speaks to you first. Claire nodded, though something about the way Alice spoke felt off. It wasn't just professional detachment. It was almost protective, as if she were shielding both Claire and Mr. Carter from something unspoken. She was shown to the cleaning supplies, given a breakdown of her daily tasks, and then left to begin her work. With the twins at Mrs. Porter's, Claire had the entire day to focus. But as she moved through the vast spaces, wiping down shelves and dusting furniture, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was disturbing something, as if her presence alone unsettled the quiet that had settled here for far too long. By midday, she found herself in the library, a grand room filled with towering shelves of books, all perfectly aligned. A fireplace stood at the center, but there were no signs that it had ever been used. Everything in the house was clean, untouched. And that's when it hit her. The mansion was like a museum, not a home, not a place of warmth and comfort. It was something that had been frozen in time, preserved like an artifact that no one dared to alter. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the bookshelves, her fingertips collecting the finest layer of dust that had managed to settle despite the house's immaculate condition. A house this perfect should have felt alive, bustling with movement, with laughter. But instead, it felt haunted, not by ghosts but by memories, by things that had been here once but had long since disappeared. She turned to the window, gazing out into the vast garden. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, the pathways meticulously maintained. But there were no flowers, no color, just structure and order, with no signs of joy. It was then that she realized the truth. This mansion wasn't just cold, it was grieving. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She turned quickly, expecting Alice, but instead she found herself face to face with Harrison Carter. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. She had barely seen him since the day of her interview, and standing this close to him now, she felt that same quiet intensity rolling off of him. He was an intimidating figure, not just because of his wealth, but because of the way he carried himself. His presence filled the room, yet he looked distant, as if he weren't fully here, even while standing right in front of her. "Miss Evans?" His voice was low, smooth, but edged with something unreadable. "Mr. Carter?" she managed, straightening slightly, trying to shake off the strange tension in the air. "I was just finishing up in here." He nodded slightly, his gaze flickering around the room, but not at the furniture or the books. It was as if he were looking for something that wasn't there. Then, after a long silence, he spoke again. "You don't have to clean this room every day." Claire frowned. "I don't use it," he interrupted, his voice clipped. "There's no need." Claire hesitated. It was such a simple statement, but it carried weight. A man who owned a library this magnificent should have used it. And yet, there was something final in his tone. As if this room held something he couldn't face. He turned to leave, but before he could step out, Claire found herself speaking. "Why are there no flowers?" The words were out before she could stop them. Harrison stilled. Slowly he turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "What?" "The garden," Claire said, gathering her courage. "It's beautiful, but it's all hedges. There aren't any flowers." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that he would dismiss her the way he dismissed everything else. But then something flickered in his eyes. Something quick, something almost painful. "There used to be." That was all he said before he turned and walked away. Claire stood there, staring after him, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't understand him, not yet, but in that moment she knew one thing for certain. This house, this man, they weren't just cold, they weren't just distant, they were grieving something lost. And for the first time since stepping into the Carter mansion, Claire felt something unexpected. Not fear, not unease, but a strange, inexplicable sadness for the man who had everything and nothing at all. The Carter mansion had always been silent, but tonight the silence felt heavier. It wrapped around the house like a dense like awe, filling every room, every corridor, every shadowy corner. Claire Evans had felt it since the moment she started working here, the weight of something unspoken, something broken, something lost. And tonight, she would finally understand why. It started with a mistake, a simple accident, one that changed everything. She had been cleaning Mr. Carter's office late in the afternoon, careful as always, trying to respect the space that seemed to be his only refuge. The room was different from the rest of the house, less pristine, more lived in. Papers were stacked neatly on the massive mahogany desk. An untouched glass of whiskey rested near the edge, and the bookshelves behind him were filled with volumes that looked well-read, well-loved. It was the only place in the house that felt like it belonged to someone. But even here, there were no personal touches, no family photos, no framed memories, just emptiness, until she found it. The small wooden shelf tucked away behind the desk wasn't in her usual cleaning routine, but today, for some reason, she had lingered there, running a cloth over the dusty corners. And then she saw it, hidden between a row of books, pushed to the very back as if it had been purposely forgotten. A single picture frame turned face down. Claire hesitated. Something in her gut told her to leave it, to put the cloth down and walk away. But her fingers moved on their own. She reached for the frame, pulling it forward, turning it over. The moment she saw the photo, her breath caught in her throat. A woman stood at the center of the picture, her wavy brown hair falling over her shoulders, her eyes bright with laughter. In her arms was a little boy, no older than 4 or 5, his chubby arms wrapped tightly around her neck as he grinned at the camera. They stood in front of a carousel, the golden horses frozen mid-gallop behind them, the entire image bathed in warm golden light. And just behind them, slightly out of focus but unmistakably present, was Harrison Carter. But he wasn't the man Claire knew. Not the cold, distant figure who barely spoke. Not the guarded billionaire who kept his emotions locked away. In this picture, he was smiling. Not just smiling, laughing. His head tilted slightly toward the woman, his hand resting protectively on the boy's back. He looked happy, effortlessly, completely happy. Claire's chest tightened. She had never seen this man before, and yet somehow she had the sinking realization that this was the real Harrison Carter, the one who had existed before everything fell apart. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edge of the frame, her mind racing with questions she had no right to ask. Who were they? Why was this picture hidden? Why had he erased every trace of them from the house? Her grip faltered, and before she could stop it, the frame slipped from her hands. Time seemed to slow. The sharp crack of glass shattering against the hardwood floor echoed through the room, louder than it should have been in the mansion's suffocating silence. Claire's blood ran cold. Footsteps, heavy, fast, coming straight toward the office. Before she could react, before she could even think of picking up the broken pieces, Harrison Carter appeared in the doorway. The moment he saw the shattered frame at her feet, his entire body went rigid. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Have you done?" Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. Harrison stalked forward, his eyes locked on the broken glass, his hands clenching at his sides. He bent down, carefully picking up the photograph, brushing off the shards, his movements painfully slow. For a long, agonizing moment, he just stood there, staring at the image in his hands. Then, without warning, he turned on her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something fierce, something raw, something Claire had never seen before. "You had no right," he hissed, his voice laced with something dangerously close to pain. Claire swallowed, her own hands trembling. "Mr. Carter, I didn't mean to. You had no right to touch this." He cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "You had no right to look at them." Them, the woman, the child, his family. Claire's chest ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it. But Harrison wasn't listening. He turned away from her, his fingers gripping the frame so tightly she thought it might break again. His shoulders were tense, his breathing uneven. For the first time since she had met him, he looked truly vulnerable, and it was terrifying. "Leave!" The word was barely above a whisper, but it cut through her like a thunderclap. Claire hesitated. "Mr. Carter, Get out." His voice cracked on the last word. She had no choice. She turned and left, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She had never seen him like that before, and deep down she knew she had just ripped open a wound that had never truly healed. Later that night, Alice found her in the kitchen, her expression unreadable as she poured 2 cups of tea. "You saw them, didn't you?" she said softly, handing Claire a cup. Claire swallowed hard. "His family." Alice nodded, stirring her tea absently. "Catherine and James." Claire's throat tightened. "His wife and son." Alice sighed. 3 years ago, they were in a car accident. Catherine was driving to surprise him at a business trip. James was in the back seat. It was raining. The car slid off the road. Claire closed her eyes, her chest tightening. "Catherine died on impact," Alice continued, her voice quiet. "James survived it for a few hours, just long enough for Harrison to get to the hospital." The weight of those words settled over Claire like a crushing force. "He held him," Alice whispered. "Held him while he took his last breath." Claire felt her eyes sting, her hands tightening around the warm teacup. "That's why he's like this, isn't it?" she murmured. Why the house feels so empty. Alice nodded. He shut everything out after that. Sold the house they lived in, closed his city office, moved back here. He doesn't speak about them, doesn't let anyone mention them. He erased every trace of them from his life. Claire's heart ached. Except for that picture. Alice gave a small, sad smile. Yes, except for that. Claire sat in silence, her mind replaying the look on Harrison's face when he saw the photo. The anger, yes, but more than that, the pain, the unbearable, crushing grief that no amount of time could erase. And for the first time since she had arrived at the Carter mansion, she realized something. Harrison Carter wasn't just cold. He wasn't just distant. He was a man who had lost everything. And now all he had left was an empty house and a shattered heart. For 3 years, the Carter mansion had been a place of silence. A house, but never a home. Every creak of the floorboards echoed through its hollow corridors, every ticking clock a painful reminder of the time that had passed, the time that had stood still. Harrison Carter had built a fortress around himself, a life stripped of distractions, of memories, of anything that could remind him of what he had lost. And yet somehow 2 little boys had broken straight through it. It started small, subtle things that Harrison barely noticed at first. He would walk into a room and find an abandoned toy car, something left behind in their hurried excitement. A crumpled napkin with colorful scribbles. A tiny sock, somehow left forgotten near the staircase. Things that should have irritated him, but instead, they lingered. Then came the drawings. Came the photo. One evening, Harrison entered the kitchen late, after another long, exhausting day. He expected the usual. A quiet house, a meal left on the counter by Alice, and the ever-present loneliness pressing in from all sides. Instead, he found something different. On the kitchen table, carefully stacked and waiting for him, were several sheets of paper, drawings. At first, he thought they had been left there by mistake, but when he picked them up, his breath caught. The first drawing was simple. A tall man in a suit and him standing next to 2 smaller figures, both grinning up at him. A shaky, bright yellow sun hovered in the corner, its rays stretching out in thick, uneven lines. Above it, written in wobbly but determined letters, was a single phrase. Mr. Carter happy is better. Harrison swallowed hard. He flipped to the next one. This one was different, a picture of the mansion, but not as it was now. In the drawing, there were flowers. Everywhere. Bright, impossible colors filled the garden. Climbing up the stone walls, stretching toward the sky, it was a house transformed, a house alive. Harrison set the papers down, his hands strangely unsteady. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, staring at those childish scribbles. Something about them tugged at something deep inside him, something buried so far down that he had almost forgotten it existed. For the first time in years, someone had dared to imagine a different version of his world, a version where he was happy. The next day, when Claire arrived for work, she hesitated when she saw Harrison already in the kitchen. He never joined them here, never lingered in the common spaces. And yet, there he was, standing near the counter, his gaze fixed on something in his hands. Her heart stuttered when she realized what it was. The boy's drawings. She cleared her throat. I hope they didn't overstep, she said quickly. They just like to draw, and sometimes they left these for me, Harrison interrupted, his voice unreadable. Claire hesitated, then nodded. Yes, they wanted to make you smile. A strange silence filled the room. Harrison exhaled, his fingers tightening around the edges of the paper. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, something Claire had never seen before. They said, happy is better, he murmured, almost to himself. Claire gave a small smile. It's something Liam says when Ethan gets sad. Happy is better, even if it's hard. Harrison didn't respond right away. Instead, he carefully set the drawings down and turned toward the window. The morning light spilled into the kitchen, casting a soft glow over his face. For the first time, Claire noticed how tired he looked. Not the kind of tired that came from sleepless nights, but the kind that came from carrying something heavy for too long. I used to believe that, he said finally, his voice quiet. That happiness was worth something. Claire watched him carefully. And now? His jaw tightened. Now I know that happiness is fleeting, and when it's gone, it leaves nothing but emptiness. The words were sharp, final. And yet the way he said them, it wasn't just pain. It was fear. Fear of what happiness could mean. Fear of what it could take away. Claire wanted to say something, anything, but before she could, the sound of small footsteps broke the tension. Ethan and Liam came running into the kitchen, their faces bright with excitement. "Mr. Carter, did you see our pictures?" Liam asked, bouncing on his toes. "Did you like them?" Harrison turned, his face unreadable. "I saw them." The boys waited, expecting, hoping. And then slowly, so slowly Claire almost didn't believe it, Harrison nodded. They were very colorful. Liam beamed. "Because happy things should be colorful." Harrison said nothing for a long moment. Then without a word, he reached toward the table and carefully picked up one of the drawings, the one with the flowers. He studied it for a long moment. Then in a voice so quiet it was almost lost beneath the morning sounds, he said, "Maybe you're right." Liam's face lit up. Ethan tilted his head, studying Harrison like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Did you ever have flowers in the garden, Mr. Carter?" A shadow passed over Harrison's face. He hesitated, then nodded. "Once." "What happened to them?" Liam asked innocently. Harrison's fingers curled slightly around the drawing. "They stopped growing." Ethan frowned. "Maybe they just need someone to take care of them again." Silence. And then, to Claire's utter shock, something shifted in Harrison's expression. A flicker of something old and distant. A memory, perhaps. A thought he hadn't allowed himself to have in a long, long time. "Maybe," he murmured. And then, before Claire could even process what had just happened, Harrison turned on his heel and left the room, the drawing still clutched in his hand. The boys watched him go, then turned to their mother. "Do you think he liked them?" Liam whispered. Claire swallowed past the lump in her throat. I think he didn't know he needed them." That night, long after Claire had gone home, Harrison stood alone in his office, staring at the small drawing still resting on his desk. A house, a garden, flowers in full bloom. For years, he had let the garden remain untouched, too afraid to rip out what was left, too unwilling to plant something new. It had been easier, that way, to leave things as they were, to let emptiness take root. But now, as he looked at the childish scrawl of bright colors, of imagined beauty, he found himself wondering something he hadn't allowed himself to wonder in a long time. What if there was still something worth growing? The next morning, the head gardener received an unexpected order. "Clear out the garden beds," Harrison instructed. "We'll be planting something new." And just like that, something began to change. Do you believe Mr. Carter is finally beginning to heal? Comment below if you think the twins are the key to breaking through his walls. Let's show some love for Ethan and Liam's mission to bring happiness back into the Carter mansion. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight, turning the once pristine Carter mansion garden into a maze of puddles and damp earth. The sky remained a constant shade of gray, reflecting the mood of the house's owner, a man who had spent years locked inside his own grief. Harrison Carter wasn't a man who enjoyed surprises, least of all those that dug up things he had buried long ago. But some things refused to stay buried. That afternoon, Claire was finishing up dusting the dining hall when she heard the twins' laughter filtering in through the open garden doors. Their voices rang through the air like bells, crisp and innocent, completely unbothered by the gloomy weather. She followed the sound, stepping outside just in time to see them crouched low in the damp grass, their tiny hands digging eagerly into the softened earth. "Boys, what are you doing?" she called, half amused, half concerned as she walked toward them. "Look, Mom," Liam beamed, holding up something small, something covered in mud. "We found treasure." Ethan, ever the careful one, wiped his discovery on the hem of his shirt, revealing a small red toy car. "There's more under here," he said, eyes wide with excitement. Somebody buried them. Claire's breath caught. The toy car was old, its paint chipped in places, its wheels slightly rusted. It wasn't just any toy. It was something that had been loved once, played with, something that had mattered to someone. And she knew deep in her gut exactly whose it had been. Her heart pounded as she looked toward the house, toward the towering figure standing frozen in the doorway. Harrison. His eyes were locked onto the small car in Ethan's hand, his face a mask of something unreadable, something raw, something dangerously close to breaking. For a long moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. Then slowly Harrison stepped forward, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the boys, his gaze flickering between the muddy treasures they had unearthed. Ethan, oblivious to the tension, held up another. "Do you know who these belong to, Mr. Carter?" Claire's breath hitched. Silence stretched between them, thick enough to drown in. Then finally Harrison exhaled, a sound so quiet yet it felt like a storm breaking. "They belong to my son." Claire's chest tightened, the boy's eyes widened. "Your son?" Liam asked, tilting his head. "Where is he?" Harrison's jaw clenched, his entire body going rigid. For a moment, Claire thought he wouldn't answer, that he would retreat into himself like he always did, shut the door on the moment. But then, "He's gone." The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of 1,000 storms. Ethan's fingers curled around the red car. "Gone like far away?" Harrison shook his head. His hands, those strong, steady hands, trembled ever so slightly. "Gone like forever." Claire swallowed hard, feeling the sting of tears she knew she couldn't let fall. The boys, in their innocence, didn't fully grasp the depth of what he was saying, but they understood enough. Liam's lower lip quivered. He looked down at the car in his hands as if it had suddenly become something sacred. "Did he bury them here?" he asked softly. Harrison nodded. "He said he was hiding treasure for the future." Ethan's small hand reached out then, hesitating for only a second before pressing the red car into Harrison's palm. "I think he'd want you to have them." Something inside Harrison shattered. He closed his fingers around the toy, his breath coming unsteady, as though the weight of that tiny object had completely undone him. His shoulders, always so tense, sagged ever so slightly. And then, something Claire had never thought she would see happen. Harrison Carter, stoic, unreachable, untouchable, knelt down in the wet grass beside them. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he picked up one of the other toy cars, turning it slowly between his fingers, as if seeing it for the first time in years. "He loved cars," Harrison murmured, almost to himself. "He could name every single one we passed on the street. He wanted to be a race car driver." A small, broken chuckle escaped him, though there was no humor in it. "I used to think it was just a phase." Claire felt her throat tighten. She had known loss before, but not like this. Not the kind that left someone walking through life as a shell of who they once were. Liam, who had always been more fearless than his brother, reached out and touched Harrison's sleeve. "I think he'd be happy that we found his treasure." Harrison's head lifted, his blue eyes meeting Claire's for the briefest moment. And in that instant, she saw him. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, but the father. The man who had once loved and laughed and built a world that had come crashing down around him. For the first time since she had met him, she saw him. And then, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the wind, he said, "Maybe." The moment stretched between them, fragile and real. And then, in the gentlest of movements, Harrison reached forward and placed the small red car back into Ethan's hand. "Keep them," he said softly. "James would have wanted someone to play with them again." Ethan clutched it to his chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. And maybe, in that moment, it was. As they made their way back toward the house, Harrison lingered behind, staring at the disturbed patch of earth where the toy cars had been buried for so many years. His fingers brushed over the damp grass before he whispered, so quietly that no one could hear, "I miss you, buddy." And then with a deep breath, he stood and followed them inside. That evening, after Claire had finished her shift, she found herself hesitating before leaving. Something about the day had changed things. She could feel it. So she did something bold. Something she never would have considered before. She knocked on the door to Harrison's office. It opened after only a moment. He stood there, tired but somehow lighter, as if something had shifted, even if just by an inch. "I just wanted to say," Claire began hesitantly, "what you did today, letting them in, sharing that part of yourself, it meant a lot." Harrison didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "They remind me of him," he admitted, "the way they see the world." Claire nodded, understanding. "They see the good in people, even when the people don't see it in themselves. Something flickered in his expression. Then after a moment, he nodded. Good night, Miss Evans. Good night, Mr. Carter. As she walked away, she knew without a doubt Harrison Carter had taken the first step out of the darkness, and two little boys had been the ones to lead him there. The offer came out of nowhere. Claire had been scrubbing the marble countertops in the Carter mansion's kitchen when Alice approached her with an unreadable expression. Mr. Carter wants to see you in his office. Her heart stuttered. That wasn't a normal request. In the weeks she had worked here, Harrison Carter had rarely spoken to her unless necessary. Even then, their conversations were clipped, impersonal. He existed in his own world, one filled with work, solitude, and carefully maintained emotional distance. Something had changed. She wiped her hands on a rag, smoothing her uniform as she made her way down the long hallway. Each step felt heavier, weighted by an inexplicable tension curling in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? Were the twins being a distraction? Had she unknowingly crossed a line? When she reached the office, she hesitated for only a second before knocking. Come in. She stepped inside, her pulse quickening at the sight of Harrison behind his desk. As always, he looked composed, his dark suit pristine, his expression unreadable. But there was something different about him today. Something in the way his hands rested atop a folder, the way his gaze flickered over her before settling with unusual intent. She swallowed. You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter? Yes, he said simply, then gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Claire obeyed, clasping her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but she waited, forcing herself to remain composed. Then, without preamble, Harrison slid the folder across the desk toward her. Westbrook Academy, he said. It's one of the best private schools in the state. Small class sizes, high academic standards, excellent teachers. Claire blinked. I know of it. Good, he said, leaning back slightly, because I've secured 2 spots for Ethan and Liam. If you agree, they'll start next semester. Her brain short-circuited. For a moment, she just stared at him, unable to process the words that had just left his mouth. Then slowly she shook her head. I don't understand. His expression didn't waver. It's straightforward. Your sons are bright, capable. They deserve a strong foundation. This school will give them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had spent so many nights lying awake, worrying about her boy's future. She had worked countless hours in thankless jobs just to afford rent, food, and whatever scraps of education she could manage for them. And now, suddenly, this? It felt impossible. She pushed the folder away, her hands shaking. I can't accept this. Harrison's brows furrowed slightly, as if he had expected her hesitation, but didn't quite understand it. Why not? She let out a breath, her chest tightening. Because it's too much. I can't pay you back for this. I can't. I'm not asking you to, he interrupted, his voice calm but firm. This isn't charity, Claire. It's an investment. The way he said her name made her freeze. He almost never used it. And yet, there it was, hanging between them like something fragile, something personal. An investment? She echoed, struggling to keep up. Yes. He folded his hands together. Your children are special, I see it. And I don't believe in wasted potential. Her throat tightened. He didn't say it outright, but she understood. He had lost a son, a boy who had dreams, a boy who had wanted to become something great. And now, in some way, Harrison saw that same spark in Ethan and Liam. She looked down at the folder again, her vision blurring slightly. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Harrison said simply. Give them the future they deserve. The words nearly broke her, because she wanted to say yes. More than anything, she wanted her boys to have a chance, to escape the cycle of struggle, to grow into the incredible young men she knew they could be. But at what cost? She looked up at him, her chest aching. Why are you doing this? For the first time, something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't quite define. Because they remind me of what matters, he admitted quietly. And because I can. Claire swallowed past the lump in her throat. He wasn't asking for gratitude. He wasn't looking for recognition. He was simply offering something. something she had never been given before. A lifeline, a door to a different future. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just for the twins. Maybe in some way this was for him too. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand against her chest as if it could steady the storm inside her. Then finally she nodded. Okay. Harrison didn't smile. He never did. But there was something in his eyes that looked a little less guarded, a little less empty. I'll handle the paperwork, he said. They'll start in a few weeks. Claire nodded again, still overwhelmed. Thank you, she whispered. He inclined his head slightly. Don't thank me. Just make sure they don't waste it. She let out a soft, tearful laugh. Oh, they won't. Later that evening, when she told Ethan and Liam about the school, their eyes lit up with excitement. We get to go to a big school? Liam asked, practically bouncing in place. Claire smiled, running a hand through his hair. Yes, baby, a really good one. Ethan was quieter, his brow furrowed. Did Mr. Carter do this? She nodded. Yes, sweetheart, he did. The boys exchanged a look before Ethan whispered, I think he's not as grumpy as he pretends to be. Claire laughed, blinking back tears. I think you might be right. Liam suddenly turned serious. We should thank him. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he did something really nice for us. The next morning, before Claire could stop them, the twins stormed into Harrison's office, their tiny feet thudding against the polished floors. He looked up, startled, just in time for Liam to throw his arms around him in a fierce hug. Thank you, Mr. Carter, he said against his chest, for our school. Ethan, always more reserved, stood nearby, but when Harrison looked at him, he gave a shy but heartfelt, thank you. Harrison sat frozen, his hands hovering uncertainly. No one had hugged him in years. He had almost forgotten what it felt like. Slowly, cautiously, he placed a hand on Liam's back, letting himself feel, just for a moment. Then he cleared his throat. You'd better study hard, otherwise this will have been a waste. Liam grinned up at him. We will. As Claire ushered them out, she paused in the doorway, meeting Harrison's gaze. There was something different in him, something softer. Thank you, she said, her voice full of a gratitude she couldn't quite put into words. Harrison held her gaze for a long moment. Then in the quietest of voices, he said, You're welcome. And for the first time, Claire wondered if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about her boys. Maybe in some way it was about Harrison Carter learning to live again too. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when Claire helped Ethan and Liam into their crisp new uniforms. The navy blazers were slightly oversized, the sleeves a little too long, but to the twins they might as well have been superhero capes. Their excitement filled the tiny apartment, bubbling over in giggles and rapid-fire questions about their first day at Westbrook Academy. Will there be a playground? Liam asked, bouncing on his toes as Claire adjusted his tie. Yes, sweetheart, she assured him. And a big library. Ethan's eyes widened. Bigger than Mr. Carter's? Claire chuckled. Maybe. This should have been a morning filled only with joy, but deep down Claire's heart was heavy. The school was prestigious, the kind of place where children arrived in black town cars, not on city buses. Would her boys fit in? Would they make friends? Would they feel out of place in a world so different from the one they had known? She masked her worries with a bright smile, determined to let them enjoy the moment. Ready, my little scholars? Yes, they shouted in unison, and she took their hands, leading them outside. But when she stepped onto the sidewalk, she froze. A sleek black car was parked in front of their building. Standing beside it, dressed in his usual suit, was Harrison Carter. Her heart jumped into her throat. Mr. Carter. The twins, however, had no such hesitation. Mr. Carter! Liam exclaimed, running toward him. Are you coming to school too? Harrison let out a short, almost amused breath. Not quite, he said, looking down at the eager little boy now hugging his leg. I came to make sure you two get there on time. Claire blinked. You're taking us? He nodded. If that's all right with you. She swallowed hard, still trying to process it. That's very kind of you, but you didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. There was no arrogance in his tone, no sense of obligation, just quiet sincerity. Claire hesitated for only a moment before nodding. All right. Ethan and Liam scrambled into the car, their faces glowing with excitement As they pressed their noses to the windows, marveling at the luxury, Claire slid into the seat beside them, feeling slightly out of place against the plush leather interior. As they drove, an unfamiliar silence settled between her and Harrison. It wasn't the cold, heavy silence that used to exist between them, but something different, something contemplative. After a long pause, he spoke. "Are you nervous?" Claire turned to him, surprised by the question. "About the boys?" He nodded. She let out a slow breath. "A little. This is a big change for them. I just want them to feel like they belong." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "They will." She glanced at him, studying his profile. The once unbreakable businessman had changed, softened in ways she never thought possible. He had done more for her and her boys than anyone ever had, and yet there was something in his eyes, something unresolved. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He turned to her then, and for the briefest moment, his expression was unguarded. "You don't have to thank me, Claire." Her name. He had never said it like that before. The moment passed quickly, but it left something in the air between them. Something neither of them had the words for just yet. When they arrived at Westbrook Academy, Claire's nerves spiked all over again. The school was immaculate, with grand columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. Other parents lingered outside, dressed in designer coats, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement as they hugged their children goodbye. She felt small in comparison. But before she could sink too far into doubt, Harrison stepped forward. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. Heads turned, voices hushed. And just like that, she realized no one would dare look down on her children, not when they had a Harrison Carter standing beside them. Ethan and Liam, oblivious to her anxiety, grinned up at her. "We're gonna be okay, right, Mom?" Claire smiled, pushing her worries aside. "Of course you are." As the principal greeted them, Liam tugged on Harrison's sleeve. "You're coming back later, right?" Harrison hesitated, and for a second, Claire thought he would deflect. But then he crouched down to their level. "I'll be here when school's out." The twins beamed, and something in Claire's chest tightened. That afternoon, after the twins were safely inside, Harrison and Claire rode back to the mansion in silence. But as they pulled into the driveway, he didn't let her leave just yet. "I have another offer," he said. Claire frowned. "Another school?" she joked, trying to lighten the moment, but Harrison's expression remained serious. "No," he said. "A home." Her breath caught. "What?" He exhaled as if bracing himself. "The apartment you live in. It's too small. The neighborhood isn't safe. You're working here every day, and the boys will be at school nearby. It makes sense for you to move in." Her heart pounded. "Harrison, I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," he said quickly, as if anticipating her hesitation. "You'd have your own space, your own rooms, your privacy, but you and the boys would be secure. You wouldn't have to worry about rent, about making ends meet." Claire stared at him, emotions colliding inside her. "Why are you doing this?" His jaw tensed. "Because I can." She shook her head. "No, that's not the real reason." His grip tightened around the steering wheel. "Because you and your boys, you bring something back into this house that I thought was gone forever." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Harrison, I don't want you to do this out of guilt or obligation." His gaze met hers, steady, unwavering. "This isn't about guilt. It's about what feels right." Claire exhaled shakily, looking at the massive house before them. A house that had once been a symbol of grief, of loneliness. Could it now become something else? Something warm. Something like home? She turned back to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to think about it." He nodded. "Take your time." And somehow she knew, whatever she decided, he wouldn't take it back. For the first time, she had a choice. A future that wasn't just about surviving, but about living. As she stepped out of the car, she felt it. The beginning of something new. The Carter mansion was no longer silent. It had taken months, maybe even years in the making. But finally, the house was filled with warmth. Laughter echoed through the hallways where ghosts of the past once lingered. The heavy weight of grief that had kept the place frozen was lifting, piece by piece, moment by moment, replaced with something softer, something real. Family. Claire never imagined that taking a simple job interview with two 5-year-olds in tow would change her life so completely. What started as a desperate attempt to secure a stable future for her sons had led her to something much greater: a home, a second chance, love. She stood in the kitchen now, watching as Liam and Ethan ran through the living room, their giggles ringing through the air. The large Christmas tree in the corner sparkled with golden lights, its branches covered in handcrafted ornaments, some old, some new. A small wooden car painted bright red had a special place near the top. Claire's heart clenched as she glanced toward the couch, where Harrison Carter sat, a steaming mug in his hands, watching the boys with an expression that was still foreign to him: contentment. He had come so far. The man who once lived behind walls, both real and emotional, now sat in the middle of a home filled with love. She stepped closer, sitting beside him. "You're quiet," she said softly. He turned to her, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just thinking." Claire raised a brow. "About?" He looked back at the twins, who were now sprawled on the rug, arranging their toy cars in a perfect line. "About how much has changed?" Claire followed his gaze. "For the better, I hope." Harrison was silent for a moment, then nodded. "For the better." She reached for his hand, squeezing gently. It had taken time, patience, and trust to get here. But now Harrison wasn't just their employer. He wasn't just a man trapped in his past. He was part of their family. For so long, he had been afraid of letting people in, of loving again, of caring. Because caring meant risking loss. It meant opening wounds that had never truly healed. But then came two little boys who had no fear of love, who had offered him a hug without hesitation, who had seen past his grief and into his heart, and a woman who had, without realizing it, become his anchor back to life. Harrison exhaled, rubbing his thumb over the edge of his mug. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Claire smiled. "No, but I'm glad we did." Liam suddenly turned, his eyes shining. "Mom, Mr. Carter, come see what we made." Harrison chuckled, setting down his mug as he and Claire joined the boys on the floor. They had created a city with their toy cars, using books as bridges, pillows as mountains, and tiny figurines as people. "It's amazing," Claire praised. Liam grinned proudly. "We made space for everyone. No one has to be alone." Claire felt something tighten in her chest. She glanced at Harrison, who met her gaze with something unspoken but understood between them. "No one has to be alone." Harrison reached out, ruffling Liam's hair. "That's a good rule to live by." The little boy beamed. As the evening passed and the boys finally drifted off to sleep, Claire found herself on the balcony, gazing at the quiet winter night. Harrison joined her, standing close enough that their arms brushed. He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "I used to think love only brought pain," he admitted. Claire turned to him. "And now?" He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. No walls, no fear. "Now I know love brings life." Tears pricked her eyes as he reached for her hand. "Thank you, Claire," he said softly, "for not giving up on me." She squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for letting us in." And for the first time in years, Harrison Carter was at peace. Not because he had forgotten his past, but because he had finally allowed himself to embrace the future. A future filled with love, laughter, and the family he never thought he'd have again. Sometimes life leads us to places we never expected, through struggles we never wanted. But even the darkest paths can lead to light. Even the heaviest grief can make way for love. Harrison Carter thought his story ended in tragedy, but in reality it was just the beginning of something new. No one has to be alone. Healing takes time, but it happens when we let others in. So if you're struggling, if you're afraid to love again, remember this: happiness isn't about erasing the past. It's about finding the courage to keep moving forward, to open your heart again, even when it feels impossible. And sometimes all it takes is a hug from someone who sees you, really sees you. If you believe in second chances, in healing, and in the power of love, leave a comment below to show your support for Claire, Harrison, Ethan, and Liam. And don't forget to like this video, if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful, emotional story like this one. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the magic of stories. Until next time.